Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, this last week we've seen the hot conditions develop, and we've seen temperatures soar well up into the upper 90s and low 100s across a substantial portion of south central, southeast Nebraska. A little bit cooler conditions in some of the more northern locations, but everybody was fairly steamy this week. And we've seen this heat persist now for the better part of the last 2 weeks. There are signs as we go forward in time that, of course, we will start to see this break down a little bit as we go into early next week. But we are also seeing some dry conditions being reflected on the latest drought monitor, and we want to bring that to your attention. So as we go to the drought monitor, and this is through Tuesday, essentially what we've seen is an increase of abnormally dry conditions across portions of Missouri, southeast Iowa, west central Illinois, and then of course we got another pocket over in Indiana and of course into the northeast with this area down in south of the Mason-Dixon line that has been persistent in dryness and is starting to expand. So basically anything that's coming from the Gulf Coast moisture-wise is going to have to wet up this lower layer atmosphere, and so we're going to have some type of system that can pull that moisture well up and interact with the fronts that are moving across the northern plains. Highly unlikely. And one of the things we look for the expansion of drought is areas to the south from the Gulf of the regions where we want to get precipitation to see how dry it is, because if we lose moisture from the atmosphere to wet this region up, there's less of it available for precipitation. Now I will say this, that in these areas the 30-day trends have been less than 50% of normal precipitation, and the 2-month trends have been less than 75% of normal precipitation. So with that, we've seen some expansion in southern Nebraska, or going down south into Nebraska in the Panhandle, and we would expect this area to actually expand as we go forward in time. And there's a couple areas of east central, southeast, and south central Nebraska that are on the radar for an upgrade next week for normally dry conditions. And in some of these areas, if we miss out on some of the precip events through Tuesday, I would not be shocked whatsoever to see some go from abnormally dry to moderate drought conditions. So in terms of the forecast, what we see right now is we have this big expanse of ridges that's stretching from the southwest up into the central plains. So in the middle layers of the atmosphere, we got this warm desert air moving into our region and the moisture flowing around this. So the system that's coming across will start to impact our weather as we get later into the weekend. But for right now, some of this moisture spilling off around the periphery of this high may touch off some thunderstorm activity as we go through today and into tonight across the Panhandle. Even though it's not going to be that significant, at least it is some moisture. And more importantly, as we go into tomorrow, we start to see the ridge trying to flatten out somewhat as this trough tries to move across the northern periphery of this. So we could see some thunderstorm develop once again, isolated in the very northwestern Panhandle up in the Dakotas. But as we get into Monday, now we see the system rapidly moving toward the Great Lakes, and that's going to push the ridge to the southwest. So some of that moisture will ride over top of the ridge, and we could see some scattered thunderstorm activity. Indeed, the models are indicating that the heaviest precipitation will be across the northern plains, and we'll have a trailing cold front that will bring some thunderstorm activity to eastern Nebraska, although the precipitation output at this point in time doesn't point to a rosy scenario, maybe a ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch general base coverage, but even that I might be a little bit iffy. It just depends on how quickly the system comes through and the timing of the event. Now as we go into Tuesday, we see that this trough deepens even more, so that pushes this ridge to the southwest and we get into this cooling pattern. So we're going to break our 90s, we're going to be back into the mid 80s to low 80s, particularly across northern Nebraska. It's going to feel fairly cool, and as we get into Wednesday, we'll see this trough dig even deeper. So we're going to have a big deep fesh of northerly winds at the upper atmosphere, keeping conditions cool. And as we get into Thursday, now we start to see the ridge standing, so a lot of this moisture is going to wrap around, come piling back down to the south, and our precipitation chances increase rather dramatically. And as we get into Friday, now the ridge starts to build back in and the heat starts to return in earnest as we get to the last full week of the month. So we look at the 8 to 14-day forecast for next Thursday to the following Tuesday. Above normal temperatures invading the western Corn Belt, and in terms of precipitation, the dryness starts to push eastward to encompass a large, substantial portion of the Corn Belt.